Good evening, everyone. Before I dive into this story, I want to note that the names of the individuals involved have been changed at random to protect their privacy and make it easier for you to follow along. The real names have been kept hidden, but the events I'm about to share are based on a true case that I've come across in my readings and discussions over the years. This is a tale of spiritual warfare, one that reminds us of the dangers lurking when faith meets the unknown without proper guidance. Let me take you back to the summer of 1996 in a quiet suburb called Colleyville, Texas. It's a small town, population around 20,000, nestled just outside Dallas, known for its tight-knit Baptist community where folks live out their faith in everyday ways. Our story centers on a young woman we'll call Laura Schubert. She was 17 years old, a lively girl with long brown hair, full of energy and spirit. Laura lived with her parents, Tom and Judy Schubert, both teachers in the local Tarrant County schools. Their home was modest, the kind of place where family dinners and Bible studies were the norm. Laura had just returned from a mission trip to Honduras, a journey meant to spread the gospel and help those in need. But something came back with her, something dark. It started subtly, as these things often do. She became irritable, snapping at her family over little things. Sleep evaded her. Nights turned into endless hours of tossing and turning. And then there were the mutterings, words tumbling out in a low, gravelly voice that didn't sound like her own. Sometimes she'd speak in tongues, languages she'd never studied, phrases that chilled the air around her. At first, Tom and Judy chalked it up to stress from the trip. Honduras had been intense poverty, heat, cultural shocks, but Laura confided in them about her dreams, nightmares where she saw herself invaded by what she called the desert demon. She recalled stories from the Bible, particularly from Leviticus chapter 16, verses 8 through 10, about Azazel, the scapegoat sent into the wilderness bearing the sins of Israel. In Jewish tradition, in the book of Enoch, which ties into biblical lore, Azazel was a fallen angel, one who taught humanity forbidden knowledge like magic and weaponry, cast out by God for rebellion. He wandered the desert eternally, a spirit of desolation, inflicting hallucinations, isolation, and mental chaos on the faithful as a curse of barrenness. Laura's family were devoted members of Pleasant Grove Baptist Church, so these biblical connections hit close to home. The pastor there, whom we'll call Reverend Joe Smith, a man in his 50s with decades of prayer experience from the 1980s onward, heard about her troubles. He believed Azazel had latched on to Laura through some Honduran curse, perhaps from exposure to local folklore or spiritual practices during her mission work. The signs escalated quickly. One evening, in a fit of rage that seemed to come from nowhere, Laura shoved her younger brother, David, 15 years old, hard enough to send him tumbling. He ended up with severe bruising, needing bandages, and a trip to Texas Health Harris Methodist Hospital nearby. The doctors there ran tests, but nothing physical explained her outburst. Laura's eyes during that moment, they weren't her own cold, distant, like staring into an endless sandstorm. As a priest and exorcist for the Archdiocese of Indianapolis, I've dealt with many cases of possession and oppression over my 20 years in this ministry. I've performed dozens of exorcisms, always under the authority of the Church, with medical and psychological evaluations first. But this case, as I learned about it through court records and reports from the Dallas Morning News, shows what can happen when well-meaning people step into spiritual battles without the right safeguards. It's a reminder that evil doesn't always announce itself with thunder. Sometimes it whispers in the night, building like a gathering storm. Back to Laura. By early June, her condition worsened. She refused normal food, instead sneaking out to the backyard to swallow handfuls of sand, symbolic of the desert, as if feeding the entity within. Her body would tremble uncontrollably, and she'd growl in varied voices, one moment a wild laugh, the next a whisper claiming, "I am Azazel, the one cast into the wilderness." Through her, the demon revealed its backstory. "I was sealed by God in the desert, bearing the sins of Israel. Now I will isolate and destroy the devout." It was as if the Spirit was drawing from ancient texts, twisting them to torment this young woman. The family grew desperate. Tom, a sturdy man who'd always relied on his faith, noticed Laura predicting small events like a short drought hitting Colleyville. And sure enough, the skies dried up for days, parching the lawns and raising eyebrows in the community. The church folks whispered about demonic influence, and Reverend Smith stepped in more formally. He organized initial prayer sessions with the youth group, nothing official like a Catholic rite, but fervent Baptist-style intercessions. In that first session at the church, things turned physical. As they prayed over Laura, she lunged at a fellow teen, Sarah Johnson, 16, a local high schooler scratching her face deeply enough to cause infection. Sarah needed antibiotics and 2 days in the hospital. The doctors diagnosed Laura with stress-induced psychosis, prescribing antipsychotics, but Reverend Smith, convinced it was spiritual, urged the family to smash the pill bottle, insisting only faith could heal her. I've seen this pattern before in my work. Possession isn't always what Hollywood portrays, levitating beds or spinning heads. Often, it's subtler, personality shifts, aversion to holy things, unnatural knowledge. In Catholic tradition, we discern carefully, ruling out mental illness first. But here, in this Protestant setting, the line blurred, leading to risks. As the days passed, Azazel's grip tightened. Laura's room felt like a furnace, hot and dry like the desert, with strange howling winds echoing even indoors. The smell of dust and earth permeated everything. In one terrifying incident, Laura exhibited superhuman strength, shoving Reverend Smith himself during a prayer, fracturing his arm. He wore a cast for 4 weeks, yet he persisted, documenting the demon's claims. Azazel as the scapegoat, now free to sow death and isolation, the family prepared for more intense interventions. They kept Laura at the church overnight, watching her with pastors and youth. Azazel targeted Tom next through Laura's voice. An invisible force choked him, nearly suffocating him until others performed CPR on the spot. It was chaos, a spiritual siege. This builds to the climactic exorcism, but that's for later. For now, understand this. Evil preys on vulnerability. Laura's mission trip opened a door, perhaps through curiosity or unintended exposure. As an exorcist, I always emphasize, don't dabble, seek proper authority. This story, tragic as it is, teaches us the cost of unchecked zeal. Let me pause here to reflect. In my experience, from training in Rome to cases across the U, true possession is rare. But when it strikes, it's a battle for the soul. Laura's case echoes biblical warnings. Demons like Azazel aren't myths. They're fallen beings seeking to devour. Yet God's power is greater. Stay tuned as we delve deeper into the escalation. Now, let's pick up where we left off, delving deeper into the heart of the spiritual storm. By late June, the entity calling itself Azazel had dug its claws deeper into Laura, transforming her from that vibrant teenager into a vessel of torment. She wasn't just irritable anymore. She was a shadow of herself, pacing the house like a caged animal in the desert winds. Food became an enemy, regular meals were spat out, but she'd crave the grit of sand, scooping it from the backyard under the Texas sun, her throat raw from the abrasion. Her body would convulse in fits, muscles twitching as if scorched by invisible flames, and her voice, oh, that voice shifted like sand dunes in a gale. One moment, a guttural growl echoing ancient curses. The next, a mocking whisper proclaiming, I am Azazel, the wanderer of wastelands, bearer of sins unspoken. I will unravel the faithful, strand by strand, through Laura. This demon wove its tale, drawing from those old scriptures how it was once an angel, fallen for imparting forbidden arts to humanity, exiled to roam the barren expanses as punishment. Now, it claimed it had broken free to inflict desolation, turning believers into isolated wrecks, and it didn't stop at words. Laura began foretelling minor calamities with eerie accuracy. She'd mutter about a dry spell hitting the town, and lo and behold, Colleyville's skies turned stingy. No rain for a stretch that withered gardens and heightened the community's unease. Folks at Pleasant Grove Baptist started gathering in hushed groups, praying for protection, sensing something biblical unfolding in their midst. Tom and Judy, hearts heavy with fear, knew they couldn't handle this alone. They bundled Laura into the car one evening and drove her to the church, that sturdy brick building on the edge of town where hymns usually brought comfort. Reverend Joe Smith, still nursing his fractured arm from that earlier shove, rallied a small group of youth and elders for what he called deliverance prayers. These weren't formal exorcisms like those I conduct under the church's rite, no. These were impassioned sessions rooted in Pentecostal fervor, hands laid on, scriptures shouted, all in the name of binding the evil. The first gathering was in the church's fellowship hall, fluorescent lights buzzing overhead, folding chairs arranged in a circle. As they began invoking the name of Jesus, Azazel reared up fiercely. Laura's eyes rolled back, her body arching unnaturally, and she charged at young Sarah Johnson, nails raking across the girl's cheek in deep gashes that wept blood. Sarah, just 16 and full of innocent faith, screamed as the wound swelled, later requiring stitches and a course of antibiotics after 2 nights in the hospital. The room fell into pandemonium prayers, turning to shouts, someone dialing for help while others restrained Laura. Medical folks got involved then, as they should. At the hospital, doctors ran scans and blood work, concluding it was a psychotic break triggered by travel stress or perhaps dehydration from her odd eating habits. They prescribed antipsychotics, those little pills meant to quiet the mind storms. But Reverend Smith, God bless his intentions, saw it differently. He gathered the Schuberts in his office, arm in a sling, and urged them, this ain't medicine's fight, it's the Lord's. Smash that bottle, faith will prevail. And they did, trusting their pastor over the white coats, a decision that haunts many such stories I've encountered in my ministry. I've always insisted on collaboration, psychiatrists, doctors. They rule out the natural before we tackle the supernatural. Possession mimics mental illness, and vice versa. But here, in this Baptist setting, the boundary blurred and the risks mounted. Azazel fed on that zeal, growing bolder. Laura's episodes intensified. She'd clawed her own skin, leaving welts like sunburnt cracks in parched earth. muttering about eternal thirst. By July, the church elders decided enough was enough. They framed it as a spiritual war against this desert fiend, drawing battle lines from Ephesians 6 about putting on the full armor of God. Laura was kept overnight at the church in a side room with cots and crosses on the walls, monitored by rotating shifts of volunteers. The air in there turned oppressive, hotter than a Texas summer noon, even with the AC cranked. Like the breath of the Sahara had seeped in, strange noises echoed, howling winds whipping through sealed windows, the scent of dry dust choking the throat. One night, as Reverend Smith led a vigil, Laura surged with unnatural force again, flinging him across the room despite his size. His arm, already healing, took another hit, but worse was the psychological toll doubt creeping in among the group. Yet they pressed on, preparing for the main event, a full deliverance ritual. They gathered holy water from a blessed spring nearby, wooden crosses carved by hand, even ropes to secure her if needed, all while praying for divine intervention. Azazel didn't idle during this prep. It turned its gaze on Tom Schubert, Laura's father, in one chilling moment. As Tom approached to comfort his daughter, an invisible pressure clamped around his neck like hands of hot sand squeezing the life out. He gasped, face turning purple, collapsing to his knees. The group rushed in, performing chest compressions and rescue breaths right there on the church floor until he revived. Coughing and shaken through Laura's lips, the demon jeered, "I am the scapegoat. Cast out to bear your burdens. Now taste the wilderness." Reverend Smith jotted notes feverishly, chronicling the entity's boasts, how it was God's instrument turned rogue, now loose to sow chaos and death among the pious. The church buzzed with tension, volunteers whispering about poltergeist activity, doors slamming, lights flickering like mirages. As the days built toward that fateful session, the family frayed. Judy wept endlessly, questioning their faith's path, while Tom clung tighter to Scripture. Little David, the brother, stayed with neighbors, traumatized by the home's transformation into a battlefield. The community rallied with meals and prayers, but underlying fear spread like drought cracks. In reflecting on this phase, from my vantage as an exorcist appointed by the bishop, trained in Rome's sacred halls, I see the peril of isolation. Evil thrives when we go it alone. Without the church's wisdom or professional discernment, these initial prayers, meant for good, instead amplified the torment, setting the stage for tragedy. But remember, even in darkness, light pierces through. God's authority over such forces is absolute, as I've witnessed in rites where demons flee at his name. We'll turn now to the climax, that grueling night of confrontation. But hold fast, there's wisdom in the warning. Stay with me as the story unfolds further. As we approach the heart of this harrowing account, let's step into that fateful day, July 17th, 1996. The air in Pleasant Grove Baptist Church hung heavy, thick with anticipation and the faint scent of dust that seemed to follow Laura wherever she went. The congregation had cleared the main sanctuary for what they hoped would be the final stand against Azazel. Reverend Joe Smith, his arm still tender in its cast, had assembled a core team, a handful of elders, youth leaders, and devoted members, all armed with Bibles, holy water sprinkled from a local spring, and sturdy ropes to restrain if needed. This wasn't a Catholic solemn rite of exorcism. Mind you, no bishop's approval. No ancient Latin prayers from the Rituale Romanum that I've used in my own battles. It was a homegrown Pentecostal-style deliverance, fervent and improvised, lasting over 6 grueling hours. They started at dusk, as the Texas sun dipped low, casting long shadows through the stained glass windows, depicting biblical scenes of triumph over evil. Laura was led in, her once bright eyes now hollow, like wells in a drought-stricken land. They bound her gently but firmly to a wooden chair at the altar. Ropes looped around her wrists and ankles, not to harm but to contain the force within. The group formed a circle, hands linked, voices rising in unison. In the name of Jesus, we bind you. Azazel, leave this child of God. But the response was immediate and fierce. Laura's head snapped back, her mouth twisting into a sneer that wasn't hers. I am Azazel. The voice boomed, deep and resonant like thunder over parched plains. The one who carries sins into the wilderness. I will not depart. The room seemed to rebel against them. Chairs scraped across the floor unaided. Hymnals fluttered open as if caught in a gust, and the temperature spiked sweltering, like stepping into a blast furnace, sweat beading on everyone's brows despite the evening cool outside. One elder, an older woman named Martha, we'd say for this telling, sprinkled holy water on Laura's forehead. It sizzled on contact, steam rising as Laura writhed, screaming curses in tongues that mixed Hebrew echoes with unknown dialects. The demon mocked their efforts, reciting twisted verses from Leviticus, claiming it was the eternal scapegoat, now turned avenger, promising to drag them all into isolation and despair. As the hours dragged on, the intensity built. Michael Davis, an 18-year-old youth group member, full of youthful zeal, held a wooden cross aloft, pressing it toward Laura's chest. But Azazel lashed out, Laura's bound arm jerked free somehow, the rope fraying as if chewed by invisible teeth, and she swung wildly. The cross flew from Michael's grip, splintering against the wall before rebounding like a boomerang, its sharp edge gashing his arm deeply. Blood welled up, the wound festering almost instantly, requiring antibiotics later to fight the infection that set in like poison from the desert sands. Michael staggered back, pale and shaken. But the group pressed on, their prayers growing louder, more desperate. Reverend Smith took the lead then, his voice steady despite the pain in his arm. He commanded the Spirit to name itself fully, to reveal its hold. Through Laura's lips came the taunts. I entered in Honduras. Through the whispers of forgotten rites, latching on to her faith like a thorn in flesh, I am the wanderer, the teacher of secrets banned by heaven. The entity boasted of its fall once a celestial being, now a roamer of wastes, inflicting hallucinations that drove men mad under endless suns. It predicted more woes. Your town will thirst. Your bonds will break. And outside, as if on cue, a sudden wind howled, rattling the church doors like a beast demanding entry. The peak came around midnight, the witching hour when shadows deepen and resolve wavers. The team, exhausted but unyielding, laid hands on Laura, pushing her down from the chair to the sanctuary floor for what they called total submission prayer. They held her limbs, pressing with force, born of conviction, chanting scriptures from Ephesians about wrestling not against flesh but principalities. But in their zeal, the physical toll mounted. Laura's body, frail under the possession, bore the brunt, bruises blooming like dark storms across her skin, ribs cracking under the weight of multiple hands holding her still. She thrashed, her screams piercing, not just demonic rage, but genuine human agony. It hurts. Stop. Please. Yet the demon overlaid it with laughter, a cackle like hyenas in the night. One body for my desert domain. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, Laura went limp, collapsing into shock, her breathing shallow, eyes glazed. The room fell silent, the unnatural heat dissipating like a mirage. They untied her, but it was clear something had broken, not just the spirit's hold, but Laura herself. Paramedics were summoned, sirens wailing through the quiet Colleyville streets. At the hospital, doctors assessed the damage, extensive bruising from head to toe, fractured ribs that punctured her calm, and deep psychological trauma that would linger like scars on the soul. She spent 2 weeks in recovery, tubes and monitors beeping, therapists probing the mental wreckage. In my reflections as an exorcist, this moment underscores a vital truth. Spiritual warfare demands caution. I've seen demons expelled through proper channels, medical clearance, psychiatric evals, the church's authority, but without them, good intentions pave roads to harm. Azazel, or whatever force it was, didn't just torment Laura, it exploited the group's fervor, turning prayer into unintended violence. Was it true possession? The signs align with what I've encountered. Aversion to the sacred, superhuman feats, preternatural knowledge. Yet the line between demonic influence and human mishandling blurred here. A cautionary echo of biblical warnings in 1 Peter 5, be sober-minded, be watchful. Your adversary, the devil, prowls around like a roaring lion. But the story doesn't end with that night. The aftermath brought legal reckonings and shattered lives. Lessons etched in courtrooms and broken homes. We'll explore that next. The ripples of this desert storm. Hold to your faith, friends, in God's hands. Even the darkest tales point to light. Stay with me. Now, as the dust settled from that tumultuous night in the church, let's turn our gaze to the aftermath, the lingering shadows that evil casts long after the battle seems won. Laura Schubert emerged from the hospital after those 2 weeks, her body mending slowly from the bruises and broken ribs, but her spirit, that was fractured in ways medicine couldn't fully heal. She returned home to Colleyville, that once peaceful suburb, but the house felt different echoes of screams in the hallways, the scent of dust lingering like a bad memory. Therapy sessions became her new routine. Counselors delving into the trauma, prescribing meds not for demons, but for the nightmares that replayed the ordeal, hands pressing her down, voices shouting over her pleas. The family tried to piece things back together. Tom Schubert, ever the steadfast father, dove deeper into his Bible, attending every church service as if to atone for what had transpired. But Judy, his wife, harbored doubts that grew like weeds in cracked soil. Whispers turned to arguments. Was it really a demon? Or did we let fear blind us? She'd say, her voice trembling. Tom countered with scriptures on spiritual warfare, but the rift widened. By the following year, they filed for divorce, the papers citing irreconcilable differences rooted in faith fallout. Little David, the brother who had been shoved and scarred early on, bounced between homes, his teenage years marred by counseling and a wariness of religion that stole his innocence. Laura herself, she carried the weight heaviest. Flashbacks hit like sandstorms, sudden, blinding. Social gatherings at school became ordeals. Friends who'd heard whispers about the possessed girl kept their distance, leaving her isolated, just as Azazel had promised. She graduated high school, but college plans faltered under the fog of PTSD. Jobs came and went, relationships fizzled, even years later. she'd wake sweating, hearing that gravelly voice in her dreams. One body for my desert. It was a lifelong sentence, a reminder that spiritual wounds cut deepest when mishandled. The church, Pleasant Grove Baptist, didn't escape unscathed. Reverend Joe Smith faced a storm of criticism from within and without. Congregants questioned his methods, some leaving for quieter pews elsewhere. Whispers in the community labeled it a cult-like fiasco, and the elders convened emergency meetings to overhaul their prayer protocols. No more overnight vigils, no physical restraints, mandatory medical consultations before any deliverance. Smith, that seasoned pastor from the 80s, stepped back from leadership roles, his fractured arm a physical emblem of broader breaks. He spent his later days journaling about the event, warning others in Baptist circles, zeal without wisdom invites disaster. But the ripples spread wider into the legal realm. In 2001, 5 years after the fact, Laura, now in her early 20s, mustered the courage to sue the church. Court documents painted a vivid picture: negligence in handling her condition, excessive force during the ritual, emotional distress amplified by unqualified interventions. The trial in Tarrant County Courthouse drew crowds, reporters scribbling furiously, families of similar cases watching from the benches. Testimonies flowed, doctors detailing her injuries, psychologists linking them to the event, even Reverend Smith admitting under oath that perhaps they should have heeded medical advice sooner. The jury deliberated for days, weighing faith's freedoms against personal safety. In the end, they sided with Laura, awarding her $300,000 in damages. The church appealed, dragging it out, but the higher court upheld the verdict. A landmark ruling that echoed across American religious communities. It set precedents. Houses of worship aren't immune to liability when prayers turn physical. The Dallas Morning News splashed it on front pages. Headlines screaming, "Exorcism gone wrong, teen wins, suit against church." Articles dissected the case, interviewing experts on demonic possession versus mental health crises, sparking national debates on cable news shows. This story didn't fade into obscurity. It inspired works that kept the caution alive. In 2005, an audiobook called Faith Under Fire hit shelves, narrating similar religious crime tales, with Laura's ordeal as a centerpiece, voices dramatizing the growls, the prayers, the cries. Documentaries followed, true crime podcasts, dissecting the psychology, books on the dangers of amateur exorcisms, citing it as a classic example from the 90s. Even Hollywood took notes, though they twisted it into fiction. But the core warning remained: the line between devotion and danger is thinner than a desert horizon. In my own ministry, as I've shared before, serving the Archdiocese of Indianapolis since 2006, trained in Rome under veteran exorcists, this case stands as a somber lesson. I've handled over 50 exorcisms, always with a team: psychiatrists to rule out illness, doctors for safety, the bishop's blessing for authority. Possession is real. The church recognizes it, with rites dating back centuries, but without discernment, we risk harming the very souls we aim to save. Azazel, that biblical scapegoat from Leviticus and Enoch's lore, and symbolizes more than a demon. It's a metaphor for burdens misplaced, for isolation self-inflicted when we charge ahead alone. Friends, if you face shadows in your own life, seek help wisely. Turn to professionals, to the church's guidance, not impulsive actions. Evil may prowl, as Peter warns, but God's grace is our shield. This tale of Laura, though tragic, illuminates the path. Faith tempered with prudence prevails. And as we wrap this chapter, know that light always breaks through the storm. Thank you for journeying with me through this desert of the soul. God bless you all. As we conclude this journey through one of the most profound cases of spiritual confrontation I've encountered in my readings, let's linger a moment on the broader lessons it imparts, lessons that echo through the halls of faith communities even today. You see, the story of Laura Schubert didn't just end with a courtroom verdict or a family's dissolution. It rippled outward, reshaping how we approach the unseen battles of the soul in modern America. In the years following that 1996 summer, the tale became a touchstone for discussions on the intersection of religion, mental health, and personal rights, sparking reforms that continue to protect the vulnerable. Consider the media's role in amplifying this cautionary narrative. The Dallas Morning News wasn't content with surface-level reporting. Their investigative series delved deep, interviewing not just the Schuberts, but experts in psychology and theology. Articles highlighted how well-intentioned rituals could veer into harm, quoting psychiatrists who explained possession-like symptoms as potential manifestations of dissociative disorders or post-traumatic stress from intense experiences like mission trips. One piece featured a theologian from Southern Methodist University in Dallas who drew parallels between Azazel's lore and contemporary spiritual practices, warning that ancient symbols, when mishandled, can fuel real-world delusions. This coverage didn't demonize faith, it illuminated the need for balance, prompting churches across Texas and beyond to integrate mental health training into their pastoral care programs. Nationally, the case fueled a wave of awareness. Advocacy groups like the National Alliance on Mental Illness cited it in campaigns, urging religious leaders to collaborate with professionals rather than compete. I recall reading about conferences in the early 2000s where Baptist associations debated deliverance ministries, with Laura's story as Exhibit A for why guidelines were essential. Some denominations adopted policies mandating psychological evaluations before any prayer interventions, mirroring the Catholic approach I've long advocated. In my own archdiocese, we use this as a teaching tool in seminars for priests. Discern first, act second, always with compassion at the fore. But let's not overlook the personal transformations it wrought. Laura, in interviews years later, though anonymized for privacy, spoke of her path to healing. She pursued therapy rigorously, blending cognitive behavioral techniques with gentle spiritual counseling from a non-denominational chaplain who emphasized God's love over fear of demons. By her mid-20s, she channeled her ordeal into advocacy, volunteering with support groups for trauma survivors from religious backgrounds. One anecdote stands out. She helped a young man from a similar church setting recognize his visions as anxiety attacks, steering him toward doctors instead of altars. It's redemptive, isn't it? From the ashes of suffering, purpose emerges, much like the biblical phoenix or the resurrection hope we hold dear. Reverend Smith, too, evolved. Retiring from full-time ministry, he authored a memoir, self-published but widely circulated in evangelical circles, titled something like Wrestling in the Wilderness. In it, he reflected on his mistakes, admitting the hubris of assuming faith alone sufficed without earthly wisdom. He traveled to speak at retreats, sharing how the experience humbled him, drawing from James chapter 1 about trials producing perseverance. His fractured arm healed, but the deeper wound, it led him to mentor younger pastors, advising, test the spirits, as 1 John 4 urges, and never forget the human frailty in the fight. The Schubert family splintering offers a poignant mirror to many I've counseled. Tom remarried, staying active in a more moderate church, where he teaches Sunday school on biblical discernment. Judy, post-divorce, explored interfaith dialogues, finding solace in broader spiritual traditions that emphasized inner peace over exorcism. David, the youngest, grew into adulthood with a healthy skepticism, pursuing a career in social work to aid at-risk youth, perhaps preventing cycles of misunderstanding. Their story underscores how spiritual crises can fracture bonds, yet also forge resilience, families rebuilt, not always intact, but stronger in wisdom. On a cultural level, this incident inspired artistic expressions that keep the dialogue alive. Beyond the Faith Under Fire audiobook, filmmakers produced documentaries like one aired on public television in 2010, reconstructing the events with actors and expert commentary. It explored Azazel's mythological roots from the Dead Sea Scrolls to apocalyptic literature, tying them to real psychological phenomena. True crime enthusiasts on podcasts dissected it episode by episode, debating, was it demonic oppression, mass hysteria, or abuse cloaked in piety? These mediums don't just entertain, they educate, reminding viewers of the stakes when belief crosses into action without safeguards. In my 30-plus years as a priest, including my role since 2006 as the designated exorcist for Indianapolis, I've seen echoes of this in consultations. Families approach me with similar tales, odd behaviors post-travel, voices in the night, and I always start with questions. Have you seen a doctor, a therapist? Only then do we proceed, under the Church's right, with prayers that heal rather than harm. The Roman ritual, refined over centuries, includes protections. No physical force, always a team, constant monitoring. It's why true exorcisms are rare, maybe 1 in 1,000 cases qualify after vetting. This Texas tale warns against the allure of quick fixes. Azazel, as a symbol, represents the wilderness. We all face loneliness, doubt, the burdens we carry. But Scripture assures us in Isaiah 43, when you pass through the waters, I will be with you. Evil exists. Yes, fallen angels, principalities, as Paul describes in Ephesians, but so does divine sovereignty. Approach with humility, seek community, blend faith with reason. If this story stirs something in you, perhaps a past shadow or current struggle, reach out, talk to a trusted clergy, a counselor. Remember, the greatest victory over darkness is not dramatic expulsion, but quiet surrender to God's light. Thank you for allowing me to share this account. May it fortify your walk. Until next time, go in peace, and God bless.